Buenos días, gracias a todos por venir. ¿Me confirman si estamos ya también por streaming ahí la mesa técnica? Sí, parece que estamos por streaming, ¿no? Que no veo ahí la caseta. Sí, ya, estamos transmitiendo por streaming. Muchas gracias a todos los que se están conectando y a todas las personas también que vinieron presencialmente antes de partir a este lanzamiento del estudio para el diseño de un mercado mayorista de energía en base a ofertas. Quiero darles unas recomendaciones de seguridad en caso de cualquier emergencia. Por parlante nos van a dar instrucciones y de todos modos nuestras áreas de evacuación están por esta puerta hacia el patio que está hacia el interior del edificio. Ya, esa es la zona de seguridad. Para dar comienzo a esta actividad, invito al presidente del Consejo Directivo del Coordinador Eléctrico Nacional, Juan Carlos Olmedo, que nos dé unas palabras.
Ministro de Energía, señor Diego Pardo. Superintendenta de Electricidad y Combustibles, señora Marta Cabeza. Secretario Ejecutivo de la Comisión Nacional de Energía, señor Marco Mancilla. Directora Ejecutiva del World Energy Council, señora Trinidad Castro. Consejera y consejeros. Director de Operaciones Técnicas de Moonshot Factory, señor Andrew Ott. Representantes de gremios y academias y consultores. Coordinadoras y coordinadores que nos acompañan, señoras y señores. Buenos días. Para asegurar una transición energética eficiente, segura y confiable, se requiere un cambio sustancial en la forma de planificar y operar la red eléctrica, así como también en la forma en que se desarrolla el mercado eléctrico chileno. El coordinador tiene un rol fundamental en contribuir a impulsar parte importante de estos cambios orientados principalmente a preparar la red eléctrica para que pueda operar un escenario de generación 100% en base a energías renovables. Para lograr los cambios estructurales requeridos en esta transición, se necesitará de la colaboración, esfuerzo y compromiso de toda la industria, actuando con sentido de urgencia y buscando un amplio consenso para diseñar un sistema que permita cumplir con esta visión de manera oportuna y ordenada y con resultados positivos para todos los usuarios de energía eléctrica, quienes deben ser el centro de toda toma de decisiones. La visión del coordinador frente al escenario de la transición energética acelerada definida en nuestra hoja de ruta, incorpora propuestas de reformas regulatorias, decisiones y acciones consideradas necesarias para habilitar la transición al escenario de generación 100% renovable al año 2030. El objetivo buscado es facilitar una transición ordenada hacia un sistema eléctrico futuro 100% renovable, pero a su vez seguro y eficiente, con resultados positivos y costo efectivos para el consumidor. La tarificación marginalista en base a costos debe evolucionar a un esquema de mercado mayorista de generación basado en ofertas de carácter vinculante. El esquema actual de tarificación del mercado mayorista presenta deficiencias y complejidades en la nueva configuración que está adquiriendo la red eléctrica y el mercado de generación con una alta inserción de energías renovables, almacenamiento y recursos distribuidos. Esto hace necesario la adopción de esquemas de mercado ampliamente utilizados a nivel internacional en base a ofertas de energía con despacho vinculante y remuneración por potencia de suficiencia o capacidad. Esta necesidad también ha sido relevada por la política energética nacional, la que ha planteado la necesidad de realizar una reforma al mercado energético de modo de contar con un sistema remunerativo con los incentivos adecuados para hacer frente a los desafíos de la transición energética. Hoy damos inicio al proceso de licitación internacional del estudio para el diseño de un nuevo mercado de corto plazo en el país, con lo que esperamos contribuir efectivamente al proceso de modernización del mercado eléctrico chileno. En esta actividad contamos con la presencia de Andrew Ott, que fue presidente y director ejecutivo de PJM Interconnection, la red eléctrica más grande de América del Norte y el mercado de electricidad más grande del mundo, con un volumen de transacciones de más de 50.000 millones de dólares anuales, quien nos dará su visión del diseño de mercados eléctricos y la operación de ellos. Agradecemos la presencia de cada uno de ustedes el día de hoy y esperamos que esta contribución sea el punto de partida para una discusión fructífera sobre las reformas que el mercado eléctrico necesita. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Ahora quiero invitar al ministro de Energía, Diego Pardo, para que también nos entregue unas palabras.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Bueno, gracias por gracias por la invitación. Gracias a ustedes primero por venir. No les voy a contar yo lo difícil que está construir consenso en el Chile actual. Pero esta dificultad que, digamos, los resultados electorales del día de ayer nos recuerdan, no puede sino llamarnos a redoblar el esfuerzo de encontrar la manera de avanzar en las reformas estructurales que necesita nuestro sistema eléctrico. Hay un diagnóstico, yo diría, bastante extendido respecto de la necesidad de que estas reformas se hubieran iniciado hace mucho tiempo. Ese, de alguna manera, pasado, ese atraso acumulado, no tenemos cómo remediarlo. ¿Sí? Solo podemos remediar el empezar a dar los pasos para que ese retraso termine. ¿Y cómo se construyen consensos en el Chile actual? Bueno, de la misma manera que se construían antes. Afortunadamente este es un sector, yo siempre lo digo, cuya hoja de ruta está anclada en instrumentos normativos que ponen un horizonte de largo plazo. Nuestra planificación eléctrica de largo plazo, la ley marco de cambio climático, esencialmente. Con esos, digamos, nortes que nos sirven como ancla, tenemos que ser capaces de avanzar hacia una reforma estructural en el mercado mayorista que nos permita avanzar en ese horizonte 3 estratégico. Y la manera de construir ese consenso es como siempre se ha hecho, con la participación de todos los actores de esta industria, con la mitad de la cancha, con transparencia y sobre la base de sólidos fundamentos técnicos. Desde esa perspectiva yo quiero agradecerle al coordinador por dar este paso. Creo que una reforma de este tipo es fundamental que considere los distintos aspectos de la institucionalidad eléctrica y, por cierto, digamos, que el coordinador haya decidido involucrarse con esta licitación para un estudio técnico es una muy buena noticia porque nos permite ir pavimentando el camino con papeles sobre los cuales podemos discutir, ¿sí? Cuando no tenemos papeles sobre los cuales discutir, siempre la discusión pierde un poco los bordes y se vuelve, digamos, demasiado circular, que yo creo que eso es parte de la explicación de por qué no hemos avanzado lo suficiente en el sector de energía en este tipo de reformas, porque muchas veces las conversaciones se han vuelto circulares porque perdimos, especialmente yo diría en los últimos 5 años, perdimos la costumbre de ir construyendo consensos sobre la base esencialmente de papeles técnicos que contengan una posición específica y sobre las cuales podamos tener una discusión constructiva. Cuando las discusiones son solamente sobre la base de, no sé, una columna en el diario, o una opinión que se hace en un seminario, o un PowerPoint, es mucho más fácil que los bordes se pierdan y es mucho más difícil que las conversaciones sean constructivas. Cuando uno tiene un modelo, ese modelo tiene supuestos y tiene consecuencias, bueno, ya hay, digamos, un marco sobre el cual uno puede discutir. Así que lo primero es celebrar este hito que empieza un proceso hacia una reforma estructural que como decía recién, tiene un atraso de décadas, si quisiéramos, pero que no hay manera de seguir postergando. Lo segundo que quisiera despejar es que siempre cuando uno empieza a hacer este trayecto, hay ciertos actores que empiezan con el temor de que esto signifique algo completamente contrario a lo que ellos buscan. Y yo, mi invitación es a que recorramos el proceso. Es un proceso que está empezando, donde vamos a poder discutir sobre la base de estudios, ¿sí? El mercado mayorista se construye sobre la base de ofertas. Eso únicamente hace referencia a una gran familia de regulaciones, respecto a la cual yo creo que nosotros somos los únicos que no estamos dentro. Prácticamente el resto del mundo funciona sobre la base de mercado de oferta, pero con una gran heterogeneidad. El diablo de una reforma de este tipo, por supuesto, que está precisamente en los detalles. Y es ahí a donde yo quisiera invitar a los actores de la industria que discutamos cómo hacemos un mercado de ofertas que funcione para los objetivos estratégicos que tenemos, ¿sí? Empezar esta discusión diciendo que todos los mercados de oferta necesariamente nos van a empujar a una concentración de mercado donde vamos a terminar peor que donde estamos, es iniciar esta discusión con el pie equivocado, ¿sí? Este estudio lo que hace es tratar de mirar y de poner en un papel los antecedentes técnicos para empezar una conversación, que sin duda va a estar en los detalles, y ahí es donde yo quiero invitarlos a que nos centremos. Cómo diseñar ese mercado de oferta de una manera que sea consistente con nuestros objetivos estratégicos. Así que, simplemente para cerrar, agradecer nuevamente que demos este primer paso, invitarlos a todos en que nos centremos de manera constructiva en abordar los distintos aspectos que una reforma de este tipo tiene, ¿sí? Pero entendiendo que la única manera que tenemos de corregir el atraso que tenemos en materia de reformas estructurales es empezando a caminar. Y que demos este primer paso como sector, que demos este primer paso como institucionalidad eléctrica, es sin duda una buena noticia. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, ministro. Ahora quiero invitar a Pablo Llanadel, el director de la Unidad de Monitoreo de la Competencia, al coordinador, que nos va a explicar un poco en qué consiste esta licitación del estudio que se va a hacer.
Vale, muchas gracias, autoridades, miembros del Consejo Directivo, director ejecutivo, gerentes, miembros aquí de los gremios también y público en general. La idea, como venía en el metro, había un rapero que dijo corto y controversial, espero que no sea controversial, pero sea corto. El diseño, explicar un poco las bases de este diseño de mercado mayorista en base a ofertas, ¿ya? Bueno, esta es la nueva realidad, también lo mostramos también en nuestro informe de monitoreo de la competencia. Tenemos desagüe por el precio del sistema, una penetración importante de energía renovable, congestiones, también un pequeño aumento en el poder de mercado que hemos visualizado. Y ¿en qué escenario estamos involucrados? En nuestra hoja de ruta del coordinador, en donde se propone para el 2030 estar en un escenario con un 100% de energía renovable. Es un escenario ambicioso, una hoja de ruta que considera dentro de este marco, y como ya se mencionó, una parte licitaciones de condensadores síncronos ahora, de flexibilidad de la red, también línea HDBC, y tenemos también, y que lo que nos convoca ahora es la tarificación del mercado mayorista, ¿ya? Ahora, ¿cuál es la idea de este enfoque? Es un estudio de alto nivel para implementar este mercado de ofertas mayorista, mercado mayorista de oferta, perdón, en donde su foco, su centro, bueno, es el tema de competencia, por eso estoy aquí convocado, el artículo 72.10, que son las condiciones de competencia, y también eventuales modificaciones normativas para promover la competencia en el mercado eléctrico, y por otra parte, también el artículo 72.13 de innovación, que llama a hacer una mirada crítica al coordinador respecto a cómo se opera el mercado y también cómo son las condiciones del mismo, ¿ya? El objetivo, bueno, ya se ha dicho, es proponer un diseño para la implementación de un mercado eléctrico mayorista basado en ofertas que incluya energía, servicios complementarios y, si se requiere, un mercado de capacidad. Está condicional ahí porque ese mercado, algunos consideran que es parte relevante, una mirada holística de este sistema, otros consideran que en realidad no es tan relevante, es parte de las preguntas que tendría que dilucidar este estudio. Algunas consideraciones administrativas, esta es una licitación por invitación solamente, Se propone un plazo máximo de 5 meses para este estudio, porque lo requerimos, ojalá, a más tardar a fin de año, y no se requieren garantías para la prestación de este servicio, ¿ya? Lo punto relevante, que es el jefe de proyecto acá, se considera como contraparte técnica al coordinador y encargado de coordinar este servicio, una persona que tenga conocimiento en normativa, en ISO americano, ya sea de Estados Unidos, Canadá, Unión Europea o Australia, ¿ya? También, como tampoco esta la idea es traer o importar un modelo, sino que tenemos ciertas condiciones particulares que hay que recoger, y todos lo sabemos, el tema de los recursos hídricos que todavía es relevante, nuestra condición de un sistema bastante largo en comparación a otros. Se requiere también un profesional que sea de la eléctrica o académico, con experiencia reconocida en el mercado eléctrico chileno, también con regulación, para que se considere la factibilidad regulatoria de estos tipos de cambios, y un profesional también de la área económica, para hacer el diseño completo. ¿Ya? Ahora, estos estudios son bastante comunes, digamos. La idea es que estamos en un estado inicial y ver hasta dónde llegamos, y eso requiere un benchmark internacional, y aquí nos estamos enfocando o priorizando en lo ISO americano, nuevamente Norteamérica, Canadá, con énfasis en los medios de almacenamiento, que es lo que tenemos que incorporar ahora, energía renovable, energía distribuida y demanda. La idea es incorporar todos estos mecanismos habilitantes para la transición y que sean recogidos en este nuevo diseño de mercado de oferta. En base a lo anterior, proponer o al menos identificar un modelo de mercado que sea aplicable a nuestra realidad, y también considerando también el horizonte planteado del 2030. Bueno, siguiendo con lo anterior, la idea es que se proponga un diseño de mercado de oferta competitivo, que se adapte a nuestra realidad, que se proponga también un diseño de mercado que vea estas brechas, que son brechas no solamente regulatorias, también son de sistemas, también de personas, de plataformas también, que tiene que ser considerado, y en base a lo anterior, establece una serie de hitos para cumplir de aquí a los 7 años, que sería el 2030. Ese es el estudio en términos muy generales. Y otro tema a considerar, que este estudio, como la idea que sea de ejecución, considera una participación importante del coordinador para efectos de ver la factibilidad de las propuestas, la factibilidad de las medidas, y considera una supervisión del comité técnico, por una parte, y también un comité directivo definido al coordinador una vez que se ha adjudicado. También, para hacerlo más fácil, una serie de presentaciones de avance, ya sea vía remota o presencial, y un punto relevante, considerando también lo que señaló nuestro ministro, es el tema de tener reuniones de avance. La idea no es llegar y traer aquí las tablas de los mandamientos, sino que la idea es que se pueda conversar, se pueda tomar la opinión de los distintos stakeholders que tiene el coordinador, para efectos de que sea considerado este consultor al momento del desarrollo de este estudio, ¿ya? Y al final, bueno, terminaríamos con un seminario de forma presencial para efectos de presentar esta hoja, este estudio, estos hitos, y cómo podemos llegar al 2030 con un mercado de oferta, ¿ya? Ahí, dentro de las bases, se sugiere una suerte de tracking de informe, considerando los objetivos específicos planteados, para efectos de que en los 5 meses ya tengamos nuestro informe y pueda ser sociabilizado con quizás lo mismo que estamos acá en esta mesa, ¿ya? Ahora, un punto relevante, nuevamente, como nosotros somos la unidad de monitoreo de la competencia, un punto relevante es evitar la colusión entre competidores. Se les reitera que aquí hay un tema, aquí al menos a nivel nacional, las colusiones son de carácter penal, entonces tenemos una suerte de anexos que van a ser parte de la base, que son temas de independencia de la oferta y evitar ciertas conductas anticompetitivas, ¿ya? Yo sé que después hay una sesión corta de preguntas, así que ahí las respondemos en la medida que no sean temas, obviamente, temas de precio o temas que puedan afectar el desempeño de esta licitación. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Paulo. Ahora quiero invitar a Andrew Ott. Él fue presidente y CEO de PJM Interconnection entre 2015 y 2019, la red eléctrica más grande de América del Norte y el mercado de electricidad más grande del mundo, con un volumen de transacciones de más de 50.000 millones anuales. Es experto en el diseño de mercados eléctricos y operación de sistemas de potencia, y en la actualidad es director de operaciones en de Moonshot Factory de Alphabet. Quiero invitar a Andrew, que nos va a explicar un poco de los mercados en Norteamérica.
We'll try it that way. Thank you for the kind introduction. I apologize to all of you. I have to speak in English. You want me to? I didn't break it, right? There we go. And again, I'll repeat, thank you for the introduction, and apologize I have to speak in English. I do understand most of what's going on, though, so I'm learning. So hopefully someday I'll be able, before the project ends, I'll be able to stand here and speak to you in your language. Thank you, El Presidente, Juan Carlos, for the invitation. Minister Pardo, I appreciated your comments. Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the North American experience in electricity market evolution. As many of you probably know, my job at PJM was to design the PJM market, and obviously I had many colleagues across not only the US, but Europe and Asia Pacific during the times when we designed these markets. So I'll talk a little bit about how they evolved. Eventually, I had to run the organization, so the market design remained very important to me. That we got not only the initial evolution of the market, but also the market was able to evolve and actually support the growing need for distributed resources, alternative resources, renewable resources, et cetera. So the markets had to evolve, and we saw some areas of the world where they did not evolve and created some problems. So it's very important that your market is able to change. So I'll talk today about how the market evolved from a simple cost-based offer market to one that was much more bid-based and more competitive. Obviously, I'll talk a little bit about when you do that, you have to pay attention to market power and look at market power mitigation, because obviously in a competitive market you need to have confidence in the ability of the market to control market power. That's extremely vital that the market has confidence. We'll talk about then how the market evolved from just a simple spot market, real-time spot market, to a more sophisticated day-ahead market, real-time market, and then co-optimized reserve markets, which also were quite important in the evolution of demand response, alternative resources, and competition. I'll talk a little bit about my colleagues in Europe and how they're evolving from the other end. The markets in the US developed from a spot market and then developed forward markets and other mechanisms. In Europe, they tended to go the other way. They created the forward markets, and now they're going back and trying to fix the real-time markets to support distributed resources and renewable resources. Talk about financial transmission rights and also forward market, and these are both necessary because market participants need to be able to price risk, and they need to be able to manage risk. And you can't, it's one thing to say that the generator should take on the risk, but you have to give them tools. If you don't give them tools, then the market is less competitive. So let me talk a little bit about then specifically the evolution of the markets in North America from cost-based. So certainly PJM's market in 1996, I was still tall, but I was much younger then, and the market was a simple cost-based market. for about 2 years, and then it evolved into a bid-based market. What we found was it had significant advantages to move to a bid-based market. I list them here. Certainly, you had much more specific performance incentives for generators to meet their offer requirements, because under a cost-based market, there were many guarantees that generators could not lose money because essentially they couldn't make money either. There was no profit capability, so you gave them many guarantees that they would not lose money in form of out-of-market payments, et cetera. Some of that went away, and it actually then depended on generators to guarantee performance to match their offer. It also allowed suppliers to properly price risk, and this was not only the generators, but also competitive retail, competitive load-serving entities could also price risk. And demand response then could start to come into the market and actually offer an alternative. There was, again, the notion of cost-based markets was, it was a very narrow definition of cost. It was only like the cost of production. It didn't have all of the other costs that any generator or supplier would face. So when you went to offer-based markets, they were able to much more accurately reflect costs. And it was actually interesting because what we found in parts of the market were the actual retail, the competition to serve retail customers. The markup, meaning the margin that was offered into those competitive state auctions, they were run by the state governments. The margins went from $5 down to 25 cents when we went to a more competitive offer market, and that was because they didn't have to price margin into their retail offers because they could get the margin from the wholesale market. So what you found was then the end-use customers actually saved money, because the risk then was able to be reflected in the market. So that was actually an evidence of improved competition. However, despite all this, if you will, benefit, there was one specific action that had to be implemented at the same time, which is market power mitigation. And I want to talk a little bit about what we learned as we talked about how do you actually ensure that offer behavior is competitive, which if you have many suppliers, competition will force it. But in a locational market, LMP, nodal pricing, et cetera, you can have a limited set of suppliers in some instances, and obviously then they could command scarcity rents and exercise market power. So there were two, and to this day still exist, two different types of approaches, and they're very fundamentally different. One is a structural approach, and this is in use in PJM and also in California ISO in the US. And this notion of the test is called a 3 pivotal supplier test, and what it's looking for is essentially conditions under which market power can be exercised. So it's actually just measuring how many suppliers are available in a specific area. It's not measuring are they actually executing or market power. It's just a test to say could they. If that test fails, meaning if they have market power, structural market power, then the offers are mitigated. And these are done both in the day ahead and the real-time markets. There's a much more sophisticated approach in other markets. The Midwest ISO, New York ISO are 2 examples in the US. And this is really called a conduct and impact evaluation. So it's actually looking not only at the offer themselves, but the behavior of the participant, meaning are you having actual impact on price? Are you directly impacting price beyond the prices that existed during times of competitive conditions? My opinion is as the markets evolve and you start to see higher penetrations of renewables, you start to see higher penetrations of alternative devices, batteries, you know, I'll say, technology-assisted demand response, et cetera. The conduct impact test is more flexible to actually look at offer behaviors and those types of things, because it can actually be a much more structured way to evaluate that. But again, both of these are successful. It really depends on which approach you know, the market is comfortable with, or the market regulators, frankly, are comfortable with. But both of these have been successful in ensuring market participants have confidence that the market is competitive. And I think the evolution of demand response and alternative resources have actually enhanced competition in some of these areas and made these tests easier. If we go to the next area of evolution, this was, again, moving from simple spot markets to more sophisticated markets where you started to co-optimize and have separate markets for frequency regulation and other types of grid services, for example, 10-minute reserve, 30-minute reserve, et cetera. So we saw the ability then for generators to actually offer various services at competitive rates. And if you co-optimize, meaning when you award these, you actually look at the product substitution. So if a generator offers energy and you say, no, don't produce energy, hold the energy back and provide reserve, there's a cost to that. There's an opportunity cost that the generator faces. If that is priced in to the price of the reserve product, then the generator becomes indifferent to which choice you make. That promotes competition, promotes efficiency. It allows then the generator to have confidence that they won't lose money on that trade, which again is a much healthier and much more competitive approach. Most of the markets, I think all of the markets in the U.S. Actually have this type of approach where they co-optimize the reserves and the energy. Another thing this does is it actually expands opportunity for alternative resources to play. What we found in PJM, for example, and this would probably in the around between 2005 to 2010, we started to see grid scale batteries want to participate and provide frequency response. The initial test of that was they failed miserably. They were terrible. They didn't do frequency regulation very well because we sent them a signal, the same signal that we send to a generator, which has a bias term, meaning there's a non-zero energy bias. As soon as we took that away, the batteries were absolutely perfect in providing frequency regulation. It opened up much more competition in that market, but the only way you would see that is if you had a market that would actually price those substitution opportunities. So that was very critical to the evolution of these alternative resources. And again, as you get more and more penetration of zero cost renewable resources, having those other alternative resources come in and have the ability to participate, and not only the ability to participate, the ability to price substitution of, in other words, the storage of electricity, even though it's zero cost electricity, if you're storing solar or you're storing wind, the value of that stored energy is not zero. There is a non-zero cost to that. And these types of markets allow that pricing of, that I'll say time substitution, which again is vital in allowing higher and higher penetrations of renewables. People in Europe are actually seeing this now. That's why in Europe, they used to have forward, next day markets, intraday markets, but not spot markets. What you're seeing in Europe now is a trend to try to price more and more ability to actually see these grid services come up in markets. So Europe's headed towards more granular pricing, and the U.S. of course had already had it, and also of course you see that in for example in Alberta up in Canada. So let me take another discussion here about hedging. We had talked a little bit about in the beginning, not only did you need spot markets that allowed participants to, or generators and other suppliers to actually reflect their true cost. You also then allowed them to be indifferent to their award for physical delivery of energy or reserve. That was key. Then the next step was to give them the ability to protect themselves from from risk. We'll call it that way. So these forward markets, day-ahead market, and the development of financial forwards allowed then generators to manage various types of risk. And they could also not only manage their risk within the electricity markets, they could actually do cross-margining and manage their risk on fuel acquisition. That was also a very important evolution of the market to allow generators then to price much more accurately the cost of forward commitment. What you see today, again, is that ability to price those types of risks more directly in the market also helps development of alternative resources, because again, at the end of the day, those types of resources still have a business risk that they have to manage. So what we find then is the markets in general, if you look at, you have the real-time spot market and grid operations, and there's, of course, that design is important. The real-time market, of course, goes around that. You have a day-ahead market connected with financial transmission rights or other types of transmission hedges. And then you have, of course, the financial markets. You have swaps, options, spreads, highly developed different types of products that allow risk management. Also allows market participants, again, to, if you will, ensure that the risk that they are taking on is essentially well understood. Lastly, I'll talk a little bit about the other evolution we saw in the U.S. Certainly was more sophistication of forward markets. You had exchange-traded markets. This would be a very specific, highly standardized product that was traded. The New York Mercantile Exchange, Chicago Board of Trade, et cetera, those standard exchanges actually started pricing electricity futures. Then you also had, if you will, less standardized markets, OTC, over-the-counter markets, bilateral markets. So these were for the less standardized trades between counterparties. Then, of course, you had the forward markets themselves, which are actually then either, some of them are run by RTOs. The organized markets are essentially the RTO markets that essentially allow the forward energy then to be essentially taken to physical delivery. So that there's a complete path from a forward commitment to physical delivery for the electricity, which allowed it to match other types of commodities. And again, some of the types of products that are there, this is by no means an exhaustive list, are these types that you see here. And again, this allows people to hedge their risk. And again, as you develop alternative technologies, being able to price or finance these types of technologies, so you can go to an investor and get money. Having forward markets where you can lock in forward revenue is an immense accelerator to investment. So probably the last thing I would talk about is some of the experience we had with locational markets. Developing forward market liquidity is important. So when you have 10,000 nodes or 2,000 nodes that are in a locational market, having this concept of a trading hub where you have a standard product, people can buy and sell on a forward exchange, and then you allow those price differences to be between the supply and the demand to be actually managed through the product called financial transmission rights. Here's an illustrative example. So if you have a generator, you're going to sell into a hub. The hub is exchange traded. So the price difference between, or the spread, if you will, basis risk, whatever terminology you use. So that's the ability to hedge that is basically a transmission right or a swap or a spread to a trading hub, which you can buy and sell in exchanges or over the counter. And then the actual consumer then can hedge their risks from the hub to their delivery point. I've had the conversation, for example, many of you know I work for the Moonshot Factory. I've had some conversations with some renewable suppliers within the various markets, whether it be MISO in the US, PJM, et cetera. And this notion of, especially for a renewable resource or a renewable project, as they're looking at the project development, being able to price that locational differential and sell their energy forward. They're not only selling the commodity, which is forward energy, but they're also selling clean forward energy or zero emission forward energy. But to do that, they have to actually get the energy from the point where the wind farm or the solar farm where they're producing it to the point where it's traded. The only way to do that is to have this type of mechanism, and it supports the development of, I'll say, more financially feasible development of renewables. So with that, I will stop and appreciate your attention, and if you have questions, my translator is right here, so he can help me if we have any. Thank you.
¿Se escucha esto? Sí. Si quieren partimos, no sé si alguien tiene dudas para Andrew, partimos por ahí o no sé. ¿Alguna duda? O para Pablo también podemos aceptar ahí. Javier, pasarte el micrófono para que nos escuchen desde la casa.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting to know all the experience that you have. And I have one question. In your experience or in the experience in PJM and in these other markets, how long it took to have this transition from this cost-based mechanism to the market with offers? How many years, how many different steps it is important to take into account for a good implementation of this kind of market?
Yeah, I can speak to the PJM experience. It took about 12 to 18 months to put together essentially have discussion and then actually implement the bid-based market. The actual mechanics of doing it were not, it was really more getting the appropriate market power mitigation procedures in place. Because the bid-based market essentially flows through the same dispatch. It's just you changed what the offers are, so that you didn't really change the dispatch engines, but you changed the ability to screen for power. So I think my recollection was around 12 months. I think it was. We might have you could stretch it to 18, but it was around that time frame.
Thank you very much. So Andy here, I have two questions. So the first one is, anytime we talk about switching to a bid-based market, one of the first questions that comes up is, how about the California electricity crisis? What if we run into that risk? And my question for you is, why do you think that the California crisis only occurred in California and not in any other markets? That's the first question. And the second is a more technical one. Is if in any of these transitions, if you needed to build a stakeholder support for the transition. So I was thinking about, for example, when IBM developed the new optimization solver and you switched to mixed integer programs, I recall reading that you run 2 solvers in parallel, and for like 1 or 2 years, and you show the stakeholders that the new tool was better than the old one.
Right.
And I wonder if you can learn anything from that for the transitions we're aiming for.
Right. Okay, well, first I'll talk about, again, I'll give you my opinion of I'm sure there's plenty written on the California experience, and maybe it's best to stand up. So what, effectively, the big issue with California was that there was a requirement, essentially, that the load serving entities didn't actually hedge. So the government actually forbade them from, essentially protecting themselves, so they were open to the spot market. And then you had this, some of these other, I'll say, illicit behaviors that occurred by traders, essentially, again, because the market design itself didn't actually reflect the physical reality of trading. So the reason it didn't happen, for example, in PJM or New England, was you didn't have those 2, what I'll call significant flaws, which were in PJM. Of course, it started out as a flow-based market with the essentially full nodal pricing. So you weren't able to hide and have those types of ricochet type transactions. But the second piece that really created the significant crisis was the fact that there were rules against. In other words, you think about a retail market and retailers. The first thing you'd want them to do is actually protect themselves, at least to some extent, from spot market volatility, and essentially that was outlawed in California. So those are 2 issues I would raise, and that simply didn't exist. For example, in the state of New Jersey, in PJM, the state actually mandated forward hedging for the suppliers, so it was actually a much healthier approach. And I contrast that to Maryland, for example. We had a gas, I think there was a hurricane in the Gulf, I forget, the Katrina. And so when the price impacts of that gas crisis, if you will, the natural gas crisis, New Jersey required 3-year forward hedging. I think their customers took like a 25% hit. Maryland only required, like a 1 year, and their customers took a 70% hit. So that notion of having a much better designed hedging structure by the state government was really what saves markets from having those impacts. Let me talk a little bit about then, one of the things that we did that was successful, and I know other markets in the US did this too, was when we started moving into spot pricing. And so we actually turned on the spot prices, but they didn't actually, we would publish them out to the participants before they actually were financially binding. And it gave people confidence because they could actually see, as you say, there's 2 parallel, one was the cost based, the other was the market based, and people could see them. And the other part of it was as we started doing more sophisticated product substitution effects, co-optimization, people having that transparency and having the confidence that the numbers were right was a key factor. And again, I mean, the key point is markets, participants care about the prices being accurate, right? Because they're putting their money at risk. And so giving them that kind of transparency, I think, was also helpful. I don't know if that's what you meant, but that was what I think was a success story. There were plenty of, by the way, the opposite of success is failure, I think. We had a couple of those too, but I think some of the success stories were related to transparency.
I have a question. In terms of people, it was necessary to develop some different training in terms of the skills to approach the market in a different way?
You mean, was this from a participant perspective, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, certainly market participants, some of the market participants were quite sophisticated because they had come from gas trading or other types of commodity trading. So what we saw was, I mean, if you take away the people who were doing, less than, I should say, legal things like Enron, you take them away, but you actually look at the people who brought in the sophistication of forward trading. It actually was helpful, and they ended up being helpful in educating other participants. You had less sophisticated participants in the United States. They were called the public power entities, and these essentially they weren't. They were entities where the municipality, for example, owned and was responsible for serving customers at a local level in some cities. So they were much less sophisticated. There was a very famous, I think this happened in 1999 or the year 2000, where one of those actually did not hedge locational risk and ended up, on the verge of bankruptcy because they just didn't understand. I personally felt bad because I should have educated them, because I could have. I did actually tell them. I just didn't tell them for real, I guess. But I didn't tell them. And by the way, one thing people say is you have to hear something 7 times before you actually digest it. And I think I only told them 5 times. So the point was to avoid that kind of, I'll say, hard lesson. Training participants is something that we took to heart. So the grid operator, which was at the time, my organization PJM, actually started creating training courses for participants to help them through these times of transition, because there were times when, I'll say, less sophisticated market participants actually had problems. So that's certainly something you need to watch for.
Thank you. Analia Rojas from the Chilean Renewable and Storage Association. So I would like to have 2 questions. I wrote them down. The first of all is, what do you think about when we see practical observation in some of the markets, such as Iran or Korea, where also day-ahead markets have been already implemented? How can an independent system operator manage the high number of power unit status changes in terms of starts and stops in a day-ahead program output? So which is the role in there, probably to look for a reduction in the drawbacks of this kind of units? That's the first question. And the second one is how to approach also the role of the regulator in terms of the loss of the control or pricing in terms of the opportunity cost of the energy versus reserve task they currently exhibit.
Okay, so the first question, if I understand, was how does the grid operator or the day-ahead market operator actually deal with increasing amounts of I'll say more granular. In other words, instead of having 100 very large generators, you have 5,000 smaller generators. And essentially the tools evolved to the point where, meaning the optimization tools, we had more sophisticated approaches. We found that you could actually support that type of granularity. So there was no limitation in the software, if you will, to do what you'd style as unit commitment or scheduling. So if we'd have tried to do that in 1990, it wouldn't have, the software couldn't have handled it. But now, certainly in the development, having sophisticated algorithms to do that is not a problem. Markets the size of, for example, PJM, which probably has 20, 30,000 different control points, are operating quite well today on that. I think your second question, could you remind me? Sorry.
What is the approach for the regulator in terms of the loss, in terms of the pricing of the opportunity cost? Well, probably there's some institutional also requirements over there.
Yeah, so the regulators, so you have the state regulator in the U.S. There's a state regulator or the municipal regulator, whichever it is, and they're essentially defining the rules for retail competition, and then you have the market, the wholesale market, if you will, operator, which again you have a market monitor, and you have in the case of the U.S. you have a federal agency called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission monitoring that. So effectively, what happens is all offers into these markets, not only do they come to the grid operator and to the market monitor, they all also go straight to the regulator, so the regulator has all the information on the offers. So effectively, so you have essentially several tiers of monitoring where you can look at offer behaviors over time, and that's why the one type of market power test called the conduct and impact test actually looks at offer behavior of a supplier historically. And if all of a sudden, now a couple of their competitors went away and all of a sudden their offers get, much more aggressive, you can actually see that change, and that's called part of the conduct impact test. The conduct is how did your offer change over time, and if it was, if it was compensatory before, why now suddenly do you need to up it by 20%? So that those types of if you will, trajectories of offers are quite well understood. So the regulator essentially then can depend upon the independent market monitor of the wholesale market giving them that information. So that's really how we saw it evolve in the U.S. And certainly the more sophisticated market power mitigation procedures, I think, were quite helpful to the regulators.
Hello, good morning. Rodrigo Quinteros from Moray Energy Consulting. I saw in your presentation that there were some elements in the design of the market that seem to be very relevant for a successful implementation. For instance, transmission rights and eventually a participation of demand. Also apparently financial markets that have products, and also probably a market that is deep. So actually the players can mitigate and price the risk. So in a country like Chile that is relatively small with very with the demand contracted on long-term basis for majority of the consumption, and eventually with the situation that we have now where demand really do not participate, how do you envision this transition? Probably we will need to move forward with a lot of reforms in parallel. It's not just changing the mechanism from cost to offers, right?
Right. Now there's an evolution, and I think giving customers, and again, I mean, there's different types of course of consumers of electricity, right? And what we found was like residential, meaning homeowners and as consumers were obviously not going to jump in and be demand response, meaning price responsive right away. But what we found was that some of the larger customers, and could have been in our case data centers or commercial customers like Walmart or other types of retail stores. What we found was they could make some changes to the way they use electricity, be more flexible, and actually not only help the grid, but also save money, right? And all you needed was a little, you only needed about 5 or 10% of the demand to actually be responsive to create competition. So it doesn't have to be all of it. It doesn't have to be 100% of it. And what we found was that as soon as you opened that up and allowed it, it put competitive pressure on the generators. So, you're right, you have to allow the demand side to participate, but what we found was that, all it takes is a couple of sophisticated demand response type customers to actually generate a significant competitive benefit in the market if you allow it. That was actually contrast. Another issue in California was in PJM and New York and some of the eastern market operators in the U.S., demand response actually was part of retail competition. In California, they didn't actually allow direct demand response participation early on. And it was a significant difference in the response of the market at retail level. And even to this day, I think it's actually amazing that some of these markets, especially the California market, it still hasn't really evolved demand response as well. So I think it's a good lesson. If you can do it, it's much better, and it's not that hard. It's not, because people buying and selling commodities is not a strange, all commodities do it, gas, metals, etc. Electricity hasn't in some cases, but many of the people who buy and sell, like industrial customers, commercial customers, are used to buying commodities. If you allow them to do it electricity, it actually is not that big of a step.
Bueno, última pregunta acá, Claudio, porque después Andy tiene agenda, digamos, tiene ocupado, así que adelante.
Last but not least, thank you, Andy. Just a question. We have quite a big agreement that many of these reforms we should have started them way before, as the minister mentioned. But then we had pandemic and the turmoil and lots of things. But now we're here. The benefits for society, for the different stakeholders. Have you run a more long-term impact on the real benefits of this either status quo or moving forward in this? Because much of this hasn't moved forward because, well, there is inertia in the discussion. And I think the urgency and how could we measure the benefits of what we could reap for society, for different stakeholders?
Yeah, certainly there are many studies out there for various pieces of this. I know, again, I'm getting old, so I don't remember as many things as I used to. But for example, the moving from separate reserve markets to co-optimize reserve markets and energy markets in PJM. I'm sure the study still exists out there that essentially that saved 10%. So it was a 10% savings because just making acquisition of reserves more efficient. That study, I think it was something on the order of $180 million a year in PJM that were saved just by that one change. And those studies are out there. I'm sure they're on the web. Introducing retail competition and demand side participation, where customers were able to come in and actually participate directly. Again, I know there were FERC studies, there were others, but the types of savings you're seeing there on the order of, again, 8 to 15%. So it's significant changes. I never saw a study, or never did a study on the benefit of moving from cost-based to market-based, because there's a lot of moving parts there. You have to add things, of course, like the market power mitigation has to be there and has to be right, because if it's wrong, it can cost, you can have a 50% increase, you can make it really wrong. So the point is I never saw a study on that specific item, but some of these other very specific benefits, yeah, there's plenty of studies out there. I'm sure MISO had them, although they didn't do a lot of retail. The retail demand side stuff is mostly the New England, New York, and PJM. I'm sure there's studies on that existing out there, but I can't give you a specific quote.
Gracias, Andy. Muchas gracias, Pablo. También un aplauso, por favor, por la presentación. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos los que pudieron venir y también a toda la gente que tuvimos conectada a través de YouTube. Esta presentación va a quedar disponible en la web desde este instante, así que para que la puedan repasar si necesitan y cualquier duda, bueno, estamos aquí para servirles. Muchas gracias a todos, que estén muy bien.